You know, when we talk about abortion rates in Black American communities, the conversation almost always gets emotional. But what if we've been looking at it all wrong? What if the real story isn't about morality, but about structure? Well, the data shows a pattern that might just change how you see everything.
So, that brings us to the big question here. What's really truly driving the different abortion rates we see among various Black communities right here in the US? The answer, well, it's probably not what you think.
Look, the way this conversation usually goes is it gets framed as an issue of morality or even race. But what if the data tells a totally different story? A data-driven view suggests something else is going on, that this is really about structure and socioeconomic stability. And today, we're going to follow that data.
To do that, we're going to zero in on a really surprising pattern that pops up when we compare three distinct groups: US-born Black Americans, who are sometimes called foundational Black Americans, or FBA, immigrants from the Caribbean, and immigrants from Africa.
And here's the thing that's just wild. The pattern is incredibly consistent. Study after study shows the same thing. US-born Black Americans have the highest relative abortion rates, Caribbean immigrants are right there in the middle, and African immigrants consistently have the lowest.
Okay, so it is so important to understand what this chart is actually showing us and what it's not. This is not a judgment. It's not a scorecard on who has better values. It's just data. It shows the outcomes that result from a whole bunch of different circumstances.
Right, so that just begs the question, doesn't it? If this isn't about morality, then what on earth could explain such a huge and consistent gap between these three communities?
But before we dive into what is happening, let's just clear the air about what's not happening. The data gives zero support to ideas about genetics. It's not about how many clinics are in a neighborhood. And it's not some kind of conspiracy. The real reasons are found somewhere else entirely.
And to find those reasons, we have to go upstream. We have to look at the foundational things, the life conditions that are in place long before anyone ever thinks about making a healthcare decision. This is where the real story is.
And when we look upstream, one factor just jumps off the page: family stability. If you look at the rates of marriage in two-parent households, African immigrants have the highest levels, Caribbean immigrants are in the middle, and FBA communities have the lowest. It is a near-perfect mirror image of the abortion rate chart we just saw. The data is just undeniable. When a pregnancy happens inside a stable partnership, the abortion rate plummets, and that's true for every single group.
And another thing that matters way more than you think: age. On average, for FBA communities, first births tend to happen younger. We're talking teens and early 20s. For Caribbean immigrants, it's a little older. And for African immigrants, having a child is often delayed into the late 20s or even 30s. And, being older usually means you have more money, more stability, and a better support system.
So you put those two things together, stable partnerships and having kids a bit later in life, and the effect is just massive. You see a huge drop in abortion rates. And this isn't some special feature of one group. It's a pattern that holds true across the board. Okay, now this is a really, really important point. We have to be clear. This data isn't saying one group is better than another. Not at all. It just means these communities are dealing with very different sets of circumstances, all shaped by their unique histories and journeys.
For example, a lot of African immigrants come to the U.S. through very structured ways, like for school or specific jobs, which kind of pre-selects for stability. Caribbean families often have these incredibly strong, extended family networks that help with everything from childcare to money. And at the same time, FBA communities are still dealing with the long-term fallout from America's unique and disruptive history.
So let me just say this one more time to be crystal clear about what this data is not saying. There is absolutely no evidence that people are being targeted based on their lineage. There's no evidence that clinics are pushing different choices on different people. The main takeaway is that all these differences in life circumstances, they exist way before healthcare even becomes part of the conversation.
Okay, so when you step back and look at all this, it kind of feels like we've been looking at the whole issue completely backward. What are these numbers really trying to tell us?
Here's the single most powerful way to think about it. Abortion rates aren't the cause of a problem. They're the signal. They're like a flashing light on the dashboard, an indicator of how much stability exists in a community.
Look, the data is just screaming one conclusion. The communities with the lowest abortion rates are the exact same ones that have, on average, later marriages, stronger family structures, and more economic stability.
And all of this really boils down to one simple, powerful idea. When it comes to actually changing these outcomes, the evidence is pretty clear. Structure beats slogans every single time.
So, what do we walk away with?
I think it's three big things. First, family formation. It really, really matters. Second, stability, social and economic, is a game changer for outcomes. And finally, if we really want answers, we have to follow the data, not just our ideology. This whole thing reframes the debate, doesn't it? Maybe the most important question isn't about what happens in the clinic, but about what happens in the community long before. So, how do we build that kind of stability for everyone?